Welcome to Bat Therapy, the psychology of Batman, superheroes, and other comic book characters. Be a fly on the wall or a bat in the cave, listening in on a friendship built out of a love for talking Batman, comics, and the everyday struggle to achieve mental health and happiness. We are your hosts, clinical psychologist Dr. Amelia Brown, and comic enthusiast and nerd aficionado Keaton Hopkins. This podcast is about providing education and understanding and is not a replacement for mental health treatment or support. If you're needing help, go to bat-therapy.com for resources.
All right, so today we're going to talk about my favorite villain that's been tased in the face.
Oh no, I'm so scared.
Yes, Jonathan Crane.
Yes, so we are going to be talking about the Scarecrow. So for those of you that might not be as familiar, you probably know the Scarecrow at the very least from Batman Begins.
Yes. So in Batman Begins, he is and I'll make sure I get the phrase right when we were talking about it before. Psychopharmacologist.
Nice.
Is that the word? That's the phrase? Okay, cool.
Yeah.
Big word. Psychopharmacologist. So,
Yeah.
what exactly does that mean?
Yeah, it's funny because I was reading he's a psychopharmacologist in this, and I was like, he was? So I don't know exactly where that came from, but I think we both found that as we were, watching and reading and whatnot. A pharmacologist is someone who focuses on medications. And so pharmacists or someone who does pharmacology, they really focus on the intricacies of medications. Psychiatrists also focus a lot of times on providing medications, but when it comes to pharmacology, a lot of times you're delving in a bit more just specifically with the medications themselves.
Okay.
So my understanding, at least, is just more understanding of the chemistry and the nuances and the interactions between medications and how you can have them work in different ways. This makes sense if you think about Scarecrow.
Yes.
And what does he use as his weapon? He uses all of these sprays and venoms and blah, 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 blah. The psycho part, psychopharmacologist, essentially, so we're focusing on the mental health side of things. So yeah, that makes actually a ton of sense when you think about Dr. Crane and Scarecrow, but I think a lot of times in other iterations of him, it's more of he's studied both psychology and biology or chemistry or things like that.
I do like the combination. So whenever I do these, I get ready to do these podcasts, I always definitely go back and hit a refresher. And specifically, Jonathan Crane from the Nolan verse, he has a background in pharmacology and psychology. And so I didn't realize until speaking with Dr. Brown that you could combine those terms. And so, so it sounds like what you're telling me, though, is pharmacology definitely focuses more on the chemistry and biopathway aspect, while psychiatry is kind of like, okay, we did diagnose you and here's what we can give you for it. Is that a good assumption?
Yep. Yeah.
Okay.
A lot of times, you do have clinical pharmacists and folks that work with people more directly, but a lot of times you're more likely to see a psychiatrist in those kinds of roles. So I was surprised that they were psychopharmacologist. I was like, oh, okay. Particularly because he's forensic. So by that, what I mean is we're working within the legal and justice system.
Mm-hmm.
So when it comes to forensic psychology, forensic psychiatry, I guess in this case, forensic psychopharmacology, it's a lot of syllables. So what we see Dr. Crane do specifically in Batman Begins, I'm not familiar with this being his storyline in the comics anywhere or the animated series or anywhere else.
Yeah.
But he's essentially working for Carmine Falcone and some other people behind the scenes beyond that, of course. And he's essentially trying to help them get away with crimes by using mental health reasoning, which uh, unfortunately, I'm sure there are unethical people out there like that, but I do want to just really put in bold letters here. This would be a very unethical practice. But forensics is something that you do. So you're looking at competency to stand trial. You're looking at not guilty by reason of insanity, which is old school language, but it's so much woven into the legal language that some of those kind of older terms have stuck around just
Yes.
because it's how the legal stuff is written.
Well, it's funny because so Jonathan Crane in this movie, one, I feel like the pharmacology side of it, he keeps that part secret, right? Because whenever
Yeah.
he gets into that, it's when he's dealing with the League of Shadows or when he's using the toxin on someone, he kind of just brings it out of nowhere with his mask and just like, I got you. And but besides,
Shabam.
right. But besides that, yeah, he's just in the courtroom, kind of like, and I guess he works for the city of Gotham as a psychologist,
So
or is he part of their defense?
he's part of the defense.
Okay,
Or yeah. So like at a certain point, how am I blanking on her name? What's her name? Katie Holmes's
Rachel
character.
Dawes.
Thank you. I don't
Yes.
know how I forgot that. So at a certain point, Rachel Dawes actually mentions, I'm going to get my own expert. I think it had to do with after he had like fear sprayed Carmine Falcone and was saying that the guy had a psychotic break and
Hmm.
therefore essentially needed to be reverted for mental health treatment rather than going straight to trial. And so yeah, so you can absolutely have experts on either side. So you can have someone who is assessing, evaluating, maybe even going on the stand. You can have them going for the defense or for the prosecution. So, yeah, it can be either side. A lot of times you might have your own experts because you're trying to argue different points. But yeah, so he seems to be working for the defense, particularly when it comes to a lot of the mafia gang and whatnot activity going on.
And see, it's different in this because in other iterations of the Scarecrow, he has like an immense backstory with he's a doctorate of psychology with an
Mm-hmm.
emphasis on fear and phobias
Mm-hmm.
and all of that. But in this movie, he seems like he's just a criminal. He's a smart criminal, but he definitely just abuses the living daylights out of his job. Like, I don't want to call him a hack because
He's not a hack,
he's not a hack, right? Like he is smart.
unfortunately.
He is smart, but everything he is doing is corrupt. Like everything.
Yeah.
Everything
Yeah.
he's doing is
Yeah.
corrupt. And so
I
it's
mean, I
yeah.
rarely say everything or nothing, but yeah, I would say, on the spectrum here, we're talking about really far on the side of unethical in, in most ways.
Yeah.
It's interesting though, you were talking about him becoming just a straight up villain and this, that, and the other. Something that I connected with him only this current time watching things, because I was thinking, okay, so we're focusing on mental health roles, so let me focus in on his role. And he kind of spouts off some stuff related to Carmine Falcone. So he sprays him, and then Carmine Falcone starts kind of going off about different things. Seems like he's got some like odd or unusual perceptions or potential hallucinations going on. And so so then Dr. Crane's talking to Rachel Dawes about a psychotic break and psychosis happening. And so what's interesting is he actually refers to Jungian archetypes, which you don't hear very many people talk about these days, but there are some people who are Jungian therapists.
Now,
And so,
when you're saying Jungian, are you talking about
yes,
Carl? Carl
yes, Carl
Jung?
Jung,
Carl Jung? Okay,
yes.
cool.
And so different kinds of what we call theoretical orientations approach the how we conceptualize the brain and how people are responding to things and where mental health struggles might come from. They kind of look at it from slightly different angles. There's always overlap with different things, and there's also slight variations in how you might approach the treatment or help someone heal.
Okay.
So here's the really interesting thing about being Jungian is these are folks that oftentimes are looking at evaluating dreams. these are people who a lot of times are trying to help people better understand their subconscious. And so they're trying, like a lot of times they might connect things to like art or literature or other things to just be trying to pull these things out of you,
Hmm.
which I think is particularly interesting if you think about the dramatic representation that he has with his villainous costume. I mean, think about how theatrical it is.
Absolutely. It's very theatrical. And then I guess, yeah, that kind of plays into like if you're trying to analyze somebody, I feel like you can tell a lot about someone by what they fear.
Oh, absolutely.
Right.
Yeah.
And so yeah, I can definitely see like if he were, because we don't see that side of him in the movie where it's like I'm doing this experiment to study them. Like in the now
Right.
comic book Scarecrow, that is his
True.
thing,
Yes.
right? He's
Yeah.
like, I'm working at a university or I'm working at Arkham and I'm just
Mm-hmm.
using test subjects wrongfully and hitting them with fear toxin and
Mm-hmm.
studying them and breaking it down. But in this one, it's just like, okay, I'm gonna spray him with fear gas so I can call him insane. And he doesn't use good vocabulary either. Like at one point, he refers to them as the crazies, and I'm just like, ooh, I don't.
Oh, it it warms my heart that you're noticing those things and getting bothered by
Oh
it.
yeah, I do. I've learned things. Yeah.
It's
And so
awesome.
but while I was watching it and it's right before I don't know if it's Falcone or if he sprays someone before Falcone. He's like, "Would you like to see my mask? These crazies, they get a kick out of it or something like."
Mm-hmm.
And it's like, "Huh." I'm like, "Wow, he really
Yeah.
he's
Jeez,
he's trying
man.
to upset every therapist in the building, isn't he?" Like it's just
Yeah. Yeah. He's yeah. And I mean so in this movie, like he's doing more like assessment evaluation versus therapy in terms of at least the role they show him in forensically. But it is very, yeah, there's definitely some nuances he could maybe learn and update for himself. But yeah, it is interesting what you're talking about though, in terms of like in the comics, you see more of where it's a slightly different infatuation with fear, and you see where the development of like his weapons come from,
hmm
I think a bit better, and maybe why he's just so innately focused on fear and phobias and that sort of thing. And yet in this movie, they give this interesting twist that, in my opinion, in a lot of ways might actually better explain the dramaticism of how he creates his costume and how he represents himself. I mean, like, okay, yeah, he's trying to pull for fear, but a scarecrow, like, it's kind of kitschy and funny in a lot of ways. Like, I feel like it's better explained by this like Jungian component to how he like has his theoretical orientation, which is pretty funny.
Yeah, and it is this scarecrow is funny too because every time he puts the mask on, he's also wearing like a really nice suit, and so he looks like he's about to like pull off a heist because he's wearing like a super nice suit and he puts on this ridiculous mask and then sprays you. And I was sitting there thinking about it because everyone sees their worst fear whenever he sprays them
Mm,
with it. And my first thought was, why does he need the mask? Like, does he need
I
the
know.
mask, or
Yeah.
can he just spray you? Like, I feel like he he
Right.
he can just spray you. Another thing that I thought about too is like we talked about, his job is very forensic. He's constantly like checking people to see if they're fit to stand trial or if
Mhm.
they're what would be the proper phrasing if you said that someone was in not using the word insane, but
Mhm.
if you're saying, hey, this person shouldn't be treated as a criminal because they clearly have a severe mental health disorder.
So, not guilty by reason of insanity is probably kind of what you're talking about there, which once again has a not so great word.
Right.
Insane's not really the updated version. So I actually checked in with a colleague slash friend of mine who I work with, kind of national stuff. and he does some forensic stuff. And so I was checking with him and I was like, all this seems like kind of outdated language. Am I getting this right? But he was pretty much saying that, yeah, it's just so much woven into all the legalese and just like impossible to fully separate that out. But, so I mean, like, when you're a healthcare provider, though, you're always kind of in this balancing act, and then you add the legal, it adds another balancing act where how do you make sure that you're utilizing your skill set but in a way that people can relate to it and understand it? And unfortunately, with the legal part, yeah, you got to use the insanity word that I don't love. So that's essentially okay. There's mental health related stuff going on, and there's actually a lot of different things that might happen in relationship to that. I mean, some people might still end up, going to jail or prison, but maybe they're doing treatment within it, or maybe you're doing treatment instead. But another piece that comes up in this movie that's actually different is competency to stand trial. So, not guilty by reason of insanity has to do with the crime itself.
Okay.
Competency to stand trial is separate from the crime. It's okay, we have this person and they need to be able to understand and participate in the legal process.
Okay.
And so you might have someone who is unable to participate in a trial, and one of the reasons might be their mental health. And so what would happen is then they would go to an inpatient facility where it's not like back in the day. I think a lot of people think, oh, they go there and then they never leave. You actually are going to these facilities to specifically help someone improve their capacity, their competency with the trial. So training them, treatment, etc., with the express goal of helping them to be able to go through the trial.
I got you. So that's interesting. So you have someone being unable to, what's the term, unfit to stand trial or unfit to participate in the trial.
Yeah, so we're looking at level of
Okay.
competency is the term they often
All
use.
right. So level of competency, and then the other one is the one we talked about dealing with in insanity.
Yeah, so then we're looking at like guilty versus not guilty kind of stuff.
So I wonder, and maybe you can tell me this, has there ever been an issue with being subjective versus objective when it comes to these things? Because if someone says, oh,
Mm.
they're mentally unable to stand trial, that definition could be completely different depending on who you ask, right?
Uh-huh. Welcome to why when you were like, who does Dr. Crane work for? Welcome to why a lot of times, okay, who's the defense bringing up? Who is the prosecution bringing up? So objective versus subjective. If there's anyone listening who's just, needing that clarified a little bit more. So essentially, what Keaton's asking is an excellent question. Like, how do you make this measurable in a way that is essentially reliable and you're not kind of having it where you're not fair to everyone? And unfortunately, no system's perfect.
Right.
But there are tests and measures and interview processes that a person can do with someone, reviewing records and healthcare notes and other things as well, to assess a person's abilities. You can be looking at their cognitive abilities and how much they're able to look at their cognitive abilities and how much they might be able to like take in information or communicate. But you also might just be looking at different levels of symptoms and whatnot. So there are what we call objective measures that you can use. And a lot of times they have what we call validity scales on them. And I'm not going to go into any specifics because the whole purpose of them is to help try and make sure that we're getting as good of information as we can. And if the information might be false for one reason or another, like a person's trying to look really good, let's say it's a child custody hearing, so you want to look really good, you might be fudging things so you look better. It's only human to do that. Or you might be trying to look worse. Maybe you're hoping to kind of get a lighter sentence, so maybe you're making certain things look worse for yourself. Once again, it's human nature. So we expect some of those fluctuations, but we also want to be able to hopefully catch things that are like, okay, these scores might be elevated, or they might be higher, or they might be lower, or there might be something about these that aren't quite reliable.
Gotcha.
So we do have different things that you can use. None of them were mentioned in Batman Begins,
No.
which isn't surprising.
No.
That they wouldn't have mentioned those, and he probably wasn't going to be using any of them
Well,
himself.
what was funny was the very first time I remember being in the movie theater watching Batman Begins, and he was up there kind of like, but the person that was on trial was Victor Zsasz.
Oh yeah,
Yeah, and so immediately when they said his name, I'm like, oh yeah, he definitely isn't fit to stand trial. Like, because in the comic was Victor Zsasz is just a serial killer, and he cuts himself for every person he
he is
kills.
fit to stand trial.
Like
He is fit to stand trial.
in the comics or in the movie.
So I want to hear your what you were saying, and then come back around to that, because yeah, it can be hard to kind of catch those fine details of this.
Yeah, because like in the comics and like in the Arkham games, he's like he's saying all kinds of weird things and hearing voices at times, and every victim that he kills, he puts like he cuts a mark on
Mhm.
himself, so he's completely covered. And so when they first dropped his name, I'm like, oh,
Mhm.
are they about to introduce Arkham now? Because he's definitely a well-known Arkham
Mhm. Mhm.
inmate. But then in this, I think they mention how he's just a hitman and killer for the mob. They don't really go into
Yeah.
any kind of mental health issues that he might have.
So here's the thing, is that, well, first off, our prison and jail systems, prison and jail are essentially this day and age's inpatient treatment. It's a very, very sad reality. The numbers of people who have very significant mental health issues, and those things, honestly, there's just not the treatment and support needed in prisons and in jails to truly help these people. There's wonderful people doing that work, and I really, really respect those. I know a number of people who do it. There's just not enough of them. So there's unfortunately just a lot about our system that's shifted a lot of these folks, just the institutions they're in. We wanted to fix the institutions, but essentially we kind of shifted where they went. So this isn't to say the system's not perfect. So when it comes to Zaz, let's say competency to stand trial. Let's say that he was in an episode of some sort where he's talking to himself. He doesn't seem to know where he is. He's all over the place. If you tried to seat him in a courtroom, he wouldn't know what was going on. He would be disruptive, and it seems directly related to mental health stuff. That would be a competency to stand trial thing. Versus, okay, he's able to go through the process of court and everything. There seems to be some sort of mental health component that's a part of what happened in terms of the crime someone committed. The thing with Zaz, though, is you can also have a mental health condition and be someone who's choosing to break the law
Okay. Yeah.
outside of the fact that you have a mental health condition. And the fact that he's like he's like a serial killer for hire kind of person, like that's more than just a mental health condition going on, versus someone who, first off, gentle reminder to everyone that there is a misconception that if you have a mental health diagnosis, you're more likely to commit violence. You're actually more likely to be a victim of violence. But I'm just giving an example here of when mental health might be related to the crime that happened. But there are plenty of people doing crimes that don't have a mental health condition. But one where you might be looking at treatment versus jail or prison. Let's say someone thought that they were being attacked due to they were having some sort of flashback with PTSD and they literally thought they were somewhere else and they ended up assaulting somebody. So in that case, you're going to want to incorporate, okay, what was going on with the mental health condition versus with Zsasz. Okay, there's a lot of stuff going on, but mental health isn't the reason most of the time that he's
he just
going out and killing
he
people.
just likes killing. That's true.
He seems to enjoy killing,
Right.
and that's not so great for society. Yeah.
And it honestly, it makes me think a lot about, because I mean, all comic books are somewhat like based on reality. And so whenever I
Mm,
think about all the different Batman villains, the first thing that comes to mind that I compare them to are prolific serial killers or
mm,
crime bosses. I always, whenever I think of the Penguin, I always compare him immediately to Al Capone. And
mm,
whenever I think of someone like Zsasz, I think of somebody like Ted Bundy or the Greenway Killer, like a
mm,
prolific, known serial killer. And so it is interesting because those cases are looked at very, very hard, like the Son of Sam killer, and he said he heard a demon telling him to commit the crimes.
mhm.
But and to this day, people are like, was he lying about that? Did he know that that's what he could say so that they wouldn't give him the death penalty?
And it can be very, very hard to know. I mean, we've got instruments, we have things to help us hypothesize, but yeah, at the end of the day, some of this stuff is really tricky to tease apart.
Yeah, and it was cool that they did shed light on that and how corrupt the system can be in Batman Begins. Like, oh no, 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 he's a killer, but it's because he has mental health issues, and I'm gonna hit him with fear toxin. And look, now you can't say he doesn't have mental health issues. Like the way that he did it was
But
pretty.
yeah,
Yeah,
but there's still an excellent argument against that because if he had a psychotic break after he was arrested, that has more to do with competency to stand trial rather than is he not guilty due to reason of insanity, because you'd have to have people now. You're more likely to get people to believe you if you get someone to lie and say, oh, well, we kind of saw some of this peeking out earlier on, even though it wasn't true. I mean, like, you could maybe build a case for it, but essentially, like, when did those symptoms start? And how do they truly relate? It's different. How does something relate to a crime versus how does it relate to your ability to maneuver through the legal system?
yeah, because I feel like one of the things they left off in Batman Begins, like if they went to someone the next day and they had just had this insane, gosh, horrible word to use, this really, really bad mental health break.
Oh, I'm so proud of you.
It's bad, that was bad. But yeah, if they had this.
Hey, it's a very common word. Insane, crazy. Those are two very common words that get dropped a lot nowadays. It takes a lot to change that.
Yes, but if, yeah, say he had this really bad mental health break,
Mhm.
wouldn't the first thing they check would be to like do like a blood test or something to see if something was in his system?
Mm. So when it comes to you're actually hitting on something that's really helpful. So when someone first has symptoms that seem like mental health, we're still figuring out mental health. I mean, it's complicated. It's a lot of times it's the things that we haven't figured out fully in the brain and the body yet. The tricky thing about mental health versus a number of medical diagnoses is you tend to diagnose it based on the symptoms rather than what's the underlying condition happening in the body, because we don't yet have a way to like scan your brain or do a blood check or do such and such to say, ah, yes, we are seeing X, Y, and Z, which equals, I don't know, social anxiety disorder. I'm just pulling one out of my hat. But even though we don't have that, you're hitting on a really good point, which in general, it's good to rule out other things. You can have anxiety like experiences from, say, COPD or other things that affect your breathing and your pulmonary system and all of that. You can have depression-like symptoms from hypothyroidism. That's a very common thing that you want to make sure that you're checking, especially if someone has history in their family, especially if someone's getting quite a bit of weight gain at the same time. But you can have absolutely substances, a number of substances. You can have delirium that happens in like hospital settings a number of times. You can have a number of people talk about, getting paranoid when on marijuana, or there are a lot of different reactions to substances that can look like mental health conditions. UTIs there's just so many things. So in general, if you're seeing those changes and it's the onset of those symptoms, in general, it's really good practice to do a good medical workup.
Right, let's think about what if have I been did I change my diet? Am I taking any
Yeah.
new medications? Am
hmm
I getting enough sun? Like
Yeah.
all kinds of things, right?
Yeah. What's my sleep like? If you have diabetes, oh man, that can wreck you if your blood sugar's up and down and all over the place. Like, yeah, there's so many things that can impact your mental health and how you're feeling. And yeah, it's just general good practice. And anyone listening, if you are experiencing things, it's always, always good to make sure that you're getting your physicals, you're getting stuff checked out, even if it seems completely unrelated and primarily a mental health type situation. So yeah, hopefully they were gonna ship him off to do some labs and whatnot, especially because it happened all of a sudden after Dr. Crane was there, and
Yeah.
then especially once Dr. Crane became Scarecrow not too long later. I'm pretty sure they did plenty of labs on Falcone.
Now wait a minute.
Something's fishy here.
Right. Now wait a what's going on here? But do you have a mindful nerd moment for us?
I do. So let me find I actually have a little script I'm working off of today. So I'm going to do one of these where I make you work a little bit. I know today's not flying through the sky with Superman, but
I was
so
honestly thinking, like, what's the mindful nerd moment gonna be that relates to Scarecrow? Like, I'm really like, I came into this episode thinking, like, what's she gonna do here?
what's she going to do to me? Yeah. It's Scarecrow, y'all. Like, I gotta do something on fear. So I wanted us to do a little bit of mindful meditation that actually has us focusing on fear. Yay! I know, I'm sure everyone's so excited. So when it comes to mindfulness, a big misconception is relaxation. I should be feeling relaxed, at peace. And the ultimate goal with mindfulness is just altogether being in a more peaceful, relaxed mindset about life. But in order to do that, you need to be willing to accept the fact that life is ups and downs and things that we love and things that we hate and just all of things blended all together. So essentially not fighting against the reality of life, allowing it to be what it is, even though sometimes it's not so great. So, yeah, I want us to do a mindfulness on fear. Scarecrow, Dr. Crane, could have been helpful. There's a lot of really wonderful things you can do to manage fear. So, we're going to do one of those today. So, let's say you have someone who is afraid of heights. Then the fear they could focus on for this is, something related to heights or bats, because that's where things started with Bruce, right? So, yeah, fear of bats can be a fear of whatever. So, yeah, let's do some recalling of fear to allow ourselves to experience it. So, instead of fighting against it, pushing it away, we're going to say, okay, let's let a little fear enter our lives. Just to be simple about it, because we've talked about Batman Begins. I'm going to use little Bruce. So little Bruce, he fell into the cave and all those scary bats. So I'll use that as the example I walk through with on this. And obviously feel free to pretend you're young Bruce Wayne if that's what you so choose for your fear. But you can also pick your own. Okay. So I'd like for you to close your eyes as we always do. Or, of course, have them unfocused if you're not comfortable closing them. Sitting straight, but, relaxed. And first, just focus on your breathing. Notice your breath moving in and out. Don't worry about how you're breathing. Just allow yourself to focus in on it to help you center yourself for this mindfulness moment. And I'm asking young Bruce Wayne to recall your fear. Hold the thing that you fear in your mind. See the image of the cave and the bats as if it was happening right now. Instead of running or closing your mind off to the cave, imagine the scene continuing. Imagine the bats flying. Imagine yourself in the cold, dark cave. And let this image progress all the way to its natural resolution. So allow yourself to visualize all of the moments of the bats in the cave, all the way to the point where your father, Thomas Wayne, lowers himself into the cave, grabs you, and lifts you back out into the sunlight. Allow yourself, as you're visualizing this, to notice that there are some negative emotions, and that's okay. It's vital to allow yourself to experience the whole scene until you get to the natural end where your father lifts you out. And now I want you to visualize what happens after the thing you fear. Visualize what happens once your dad lifts you out and takes you back to the house. Notice the warmth that you feel from him, the comfort you experience, the relief. What we want to notice most is that we're showing our minds that the thing we fear is temporary. And once it's over, good things will happen. Now that we've worked through this visual of the fear, congratulate yourself by taking a few moments to once again just notice your breath. Breathing in and breathing out, relax. Breathing in, breathing out, relax. When you're ready, shift your mind away from the Wayne Manor and back to where you're seated. Allow yourself to kind of shift in your seat a little bit, just getting used to where you are. And once you're ready, open your eyes and we'll finish the podcast. What'd you think?
That was cool. That was cool. I could definitely see myself doing that, but using one of my actual fears. So I'm trying, I guess is the goal to overcome the fear or just still like part of mindfulness? Because this seems like one that you could actually do in a fearful moment.
Oh yeah, you could absolutely mind. So the nice thing about a visualization like this is it can essentially help you practice. Where if you're in the moment and you're super heightened because you're in that fear situation, you may not be at a point where you can use the mindfulness, the relaxing, the breathing to try and help you move through that moment. You may be at that point, which is great. But especially if you tend to avoid the feared situation or it's causing you a lot of problems, it can be helpful to visualize it beforehand because it's essentially practice. Because you're absolutely right. You can use the same mentality in the moment when it's happening.
Nice. Nice. I suppose that Dr. Jonathan Crane could have used that after being tased in the face. Thanks for nerding out with us.
I'm clinical psychologist Dr. Amelia Brown. Find me on social media at Crafting the Mind.
And I'm comic enthusiast and professional nerd Keaton Hopkins. Check out my TV and movie reviews on YouTube at Team JBS. Check out our website at bat-therapy.com, our Bat Therapy YouTube channel, and follow us on social media. See you next week, same bat time, same bat channel.